If you cut off my head, what do I say? Me and my head, or me and my body?
This haunting question from The Tenant is more than a moment of madness. It's a philosophical riddle, a fractured echo of identity, a reflection of a deeper existential dream, a dream you can't wake up from, a nightmare, a Kafkaesque nightmare. I'm sure many of you already know what Kafkaesque means, either from books, TV, or experience, unfortunately.
Totally Kafkaesque.
It comes from the themes and tone of Franz Kafka's writing, especially stories like The Trial, The Castle, and The Metamorphosis. Franz Kafka, a man who once said, "The meaning of life is that it ends." Franz Kafka's work is marked by deep anxiety and a persistent sense of alienation. His characters are often caught in absurd, illogical situations, faced with systems they can't comprehend and outcomes they cannot avoid. Kafkaesque Nightmare is a world where identity dissolves, where unseen forces shape your fate, where you are guilty without crime, condemned without trial, and trapped in a system that makes no sense. The horror isn't just in what happens to you, it's in the futility of escape, in the slow, quiet realization that the more you resist, the deeper you sink. Kafka's stories mostly revolve around human experiences. They poetically describe the feeling of being lost, alone, and helpless in this world. These aren't just personal anxieties, they are universal. And I can't help but live that nightmare when I watch Roman Polanski's Apartment Trilogy, Repulsion, Rosemary's Baby, and The Tenant. These films don't just depict paranoia or isolation, they take the Kafkaesque and make it personal. They trap their characters inside their own minds. They use the apartment not just as a setting, but as a cage, a soft-walled prison where reality bends, where the descent is inward and the escape is illusion. And today, in this video, we're talking about that cage, the intangible, invisible, suffocating kind. Not one you break out of, but you keep falling deeper into. The Tenant. Tchaikovsky, played by Roman Polanski himself, moves into a quiet Parisian apartment where the previous tenant, Simone Schul, attempted suicide by jumping out the window. What begins as an unsettling coincidence soon spirals into something far more disturbing. Tchaikovsky doesn't just inhabit Simone's old apartment, he begins to inhabit her identity. Against his will, of course.
Right there where you are now.
And without even fully understanding what's happening, he is slowly transformed until he becomes the next Simone Schul. At the heart of The Tenant is a very specific kind of horror, the horror of losing yourself, not to madness alone, but to something external, systematic, and uncaring. This is the Kafkaesque nightmare, a slow realization that the role has already been written for you, and by the time you'll recognize it, it'll be far too late to resist. Kafka's characters often find themselves caught in the gears of vast, incomprehensible systems. The Tenant does the same, but it cloaks that system in ritual, in space, and in atmosphere. From the moment Tchaikovsky arrives, the apartment has already been prepared for him. Simone's belongings are still there, left behind like tools for a transformation. Her clothes, her furniture, her habits. Even when Tchaikovsky gets robbed, all of his belongings are taken. Yet Simone's things are left untouched, as if preserved for him. Slowly he begins to slip into her habits, almost unconsciously, using her belongings, smoking her brand of cigarettes, drinking her favorite hot chocolate, and not because he wants to, but because the environment demands it, rather forces it onto him.
No. Would you like a pack?
Only till the time he will.
I know just what you're up to. You can't go murderous!
Eventually, he steps fully into her life, stepping into her shoes, speaking in her voice, and even contemplating her death. The cycle of identity erasure completes itself, not with a scream, but with a silent submission. Tchaikovsky becomes Simone, and at some point, tragically, he's okay with that. But this isn't just psychological, it's metaphysical. The most surreal space in the film is the communal toilet, a place that bizarrely begins to speak. Hieroglyphs appear, screams echo. There are books on Egyptology in Simone's things, and suddenly, the tenant starts to resemble something ancient and ritualistic. The apartment itself begins to feel less like a living space and more like a temple or a tomb, a space that consumes identity and prepares the next body for transformation. The toilet becomes a portal, a glitch in reality, or maybe a sacred site for some cyclical offering. Suicide becomes ritual, and the signs suggest that this has happened before, and it will happen again. This is where Polanski goes beyond Kafka. While Kafka's worlds are cold and bureaucratic, The Tenant is surreal and uncanny. But the feelings are the same. You are being watched, you are being judged, you are being changed, and you are being forced into a system that doesn't explain itself. And there's nothing you can do to stop it.
Kind of killers!
Rosemary's Baby. If The Tenant is about forced transformation, then Rosemary's Baby is about the absurdity of oppressive systems and the horror of complete surrender to an invisible architecture of control. Total, invisible, inescapable control. Kafka's characters often struggle with spaces that should belong to them, but somehow they don't. Similarly, in Rosemary's Baby, Rosemary's apartment becomes a site of violation. Her mind is intruded, her body is intruded, her reality becomes a shared property of everybody but her.
Wow. Oof. I hate this basement.
Yeah, me too.
It gives me the creeps.
Her neighbors come and go freely, the walls are too thin, the voice is always audible, and eventually there is a literal passage, a hidden door connecting Rosemary's apartment to the Castevet's domain. It's not just a metaphor, it's architecture. The apartment itself has been designed to contain her. This is the Kafkaesque system, structure so complete and invisible that resistance becomes impossible. Kafka's characters are most often met with absurd responses when they try to resist their situation.
We just want to take you home. No one's going to hurt you.
In Rosemary's Baby, every time Rosemary expresses fear or suspicion, people around her gaslight her into thinking she's imagining
Women
things.
with less flexible joints have this sort of trouble.
They all downplay her reality, often with kindness, sometimes with control, but always with authority.
It's not fair to Saperstein.
Not fair to... What are you talking about? What about what's fair to me?
Consent is never granted, but only assumed. There is no single villain here. There is only a world conspiring to keep her powerless. Rosemary is manipulated by her husband, her doctor, and her neighbors. Much like Kafka's protagonists are trapped in an incomprehensible system, the conspiracy around her is so deeply rooted that she never had a real choice to begin with. Just like Kafka's characters who try to fight but realize their fate is already sealed. And then the final collapse. The secret passage opens. The room concealed in her apartment leads into an underground ritual chamber. When Rosemary is drugged and taken to that chamber, the domestic space transforms completely, not symbolically but architecturally, into the site of ultimate violation. The space shifts from a domestic setting to a theatrical, almost surreal, religious nightmare. Here, Satan's child is born through Rosemary's stolen body.
No
The
dream.
system
This is really
wins.
happening.
Like Kafka's characters, Rosemary reaches the point where resistance breaks down. Not because she gives in, but because she realizes the system has accounted for her every move. The horror isn't just in the act, it's in the acceptance of it. There is no escape, because the conspiracy is complete. And when she finally sees her child, the satanic child she was forced to bear, Rosemary's baby, she does what all Kafka's characters do in the end. She accepts. She looks at her child, she cries, she rocks the cradle. She remains in the space that betrayed her, trapped but no longer resisting. Repulsion. Repulsion is perhaps the most internalized Kafkaesque nightmare of the trilogy. Repulsion follows Carol, a woman who is socially withdrawn, fearful of men, and slowly descending into madness inside her apartment. As the space stings, shifts, and transforms with her psyche's descent. At first glance, Repulsion might not seem Kafkaesque in the traditional sense. There's no bureaucratic system, no looming court, no external enemy, but its horror lies in something far more intimate. Claustrophobic prison of one's own mind. The same sense of entrapment, of confusion, of a reality that has turned against you, without explanation. Carol undergoes a psychological transformation, slowly becoming a hollow shell of a person incapable of social interaction. She doesn't understand what's happening to her, and neither do we. The cracks on the wall mirror the cracks in her psyche, growing worse as she loses control. At first, the cracks disturb her, mirroring her fractured state, but she also fixates on them, staring, tracing their lines with her fingers, as if trying to follow the logic of her breakdown, as if drawn into their depth. Kafka describes space in such a way that space feels empty until Kafka adds a detail, and suddenly the space is transformed, without ever quite changing, like it was always there but you just didn't see it. Repulsion uses space in the same way. As Carol's mind deteriorates, so too does the apartment. It becomes more alive, more hostile, and more surreal. Details emerge slowly, but the space itself never fully breaks from reality. It only distorts, like a dream you didn't notice had begun. The hands emerging from the walls represent her fear of male touch and violation. Carol begins the film repelled by male presence. She can barely stand her sister's boyfriend, Mikhail, who leaves her toothbrush in her cup, a small violation of her personal space. But later, that fear turns inward. She begins to crave what she fears. She smells Mikhail's vest and almost embraces it before immediately vomiting. Her body and mind are in contradiction. The mind wants to indulge, but the body rejects. This plays into the Kafkaesque idea of losing agency, the loss of control so total that even your desires aren't your own. You cannot trust yourself. You don't know if you're resisting your nightmares or inviting them in. Carol is not just a victim of outside forces, she becomes complicit in her own destruction. Carol becomes trapped in her own mind. As she transforms, so the apartment shifts to match her perception. Details emerge that make it feel more alive, hostile, and inescapable, dissolving the lines between reality and hallucination. This subtle transformation is part of the Kafkaesque nightmare. The world is no longer recognizable, but you can't pinpoint exactly when or how it changed. Like a Kafka protagonist, she is powerless against her own reality. She doesn't fight back. She simply collapses into madness. And so by the end of The Tenant, Rosemary's Baby, and Repulsion, we're left with something far more disturbing than horror. Not monsters or murder, but a slow and silent collapse of the self. Each character begins with a sense of who they are, however fragile. But by the end, they're someone else. Or worse, no one at all. And maybe that's the most Kafkaesque thing of all. You don't escape, you just vanish. Until you're left staring at yourself in a cracked mirror, in a cursed nursery, in a body that's no longer yours. Asking the same question. If I cut off my head, will I say me and my body or me and my head?